Hi, and welcome to another episode of Healthy Living Resources. This month we have with us Pat Brinkman from Fayette County, who will be talking about Heart Month, so stay tuned. And welcome to another episode of Healthy Living Resources. This month we have with us Pat Brinkman, FCS educator in Fayette County, to talk to us about Heart Month. So Pat, why is February Heart Month?
Well, we associate Valentine's Day, which is hearts, with February, so it has become the distinction that then it's Heart Month. And one of the things we're going to talk about is trying to prevent heart disease and stroke, which is the #1 killer in the U.S. today for men and women. So we want to try to prevent that. And one of the best ways to do that is to follow the Million Hearts, which is from the National Institute of Health Prevention Tips. Okay, so one is A, which is take aspirin if needed, and you really need to check with your healthcare provider if that is necessary. So check with them to see if you should be taking aspirin. B is for blood pressure, and we need to keep our blood pressure under control. So we're going to be talking a few more minutes about that in a minute after we go through all of them and give you an idea of the overview of them.
Perfect.
Okay, and C is for cholesterol. We need to keep our cholesterol levels at the right level so that we don't have a buildup in our system. So we will be talking about that also in a few minutes. S is for smoking cessation, meaning quitting smoking if you smoke now, or don't ever start using tobacco in the future or now. So avoiding tobacco is one way, and it's amazing because I never was a smoker or anything else, learning so much about how that really does contribute to some major diseases, and especially heart disease also.
Absolutely. Hopefully that can give people a good reason not to start too.
That's right, yes. And then Ohio State University added a small s on the end for stress. And we do know that stress really does affect all of us in so many ways.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, so keeping our stress under control and finding ways to manage our stress really can help us reduce the risk of heart disease.
Definitely. Thank you for that overview. So kind of starting to dig in, what are some signs and symptoms of heart disease or stroke and heart attack that we should be looking out for specifically?
Okay. So symptoms or signs of heart attack are like pain or pressure in the chest or abdomen, feelings of that chest full heaviness, like an elephant sitting on your chest, we a lot of times hear people say. Pain that radiates to the jaw or down the arm. You'll hear a lot of people say, oh, it just went down my left arm, and you know, you can
Is it usually the left arm, or could it be either?
It could be either, so either one.
Good to know.
Trouble breathing, dizziness possibly, loss of consciousness, also sweating or lightheadedness, and also heart palpitations. And then we find that women sometimes have symptoms are a little bit different than men.
I've heard this, and so it's important to know, especially for us as women, what to look out for that doesn't really fall in line with the typical standards.
Right, yes. And one of those is nausea and vomiting, or just not feeling right at all, is one of those things for women. So they don't always have that heavy chest feeling, or you know, other things, lightheadedness, trouble breathing. Those are things, you know, that are serious. So, you know, if you feel any of those, you call 911 or have somebody help get 911.
It's better to be safe than sorry.
That is very true. Very, very true. Now, stroke is a little different, and you know, but just as serious or even more serious. So, because you can suffer damage that you can't sometimes reverse. Yes. So trouble speaking, most people cannot speak right.
Yes.
They really have trouble speaking or understanding what others are saying. There's a lot of times paralysis or numbness to the face or the arms or the legs, so they're kind of dragging a leg along or something, or things fall out of their hand, they can't control their hand. they may have problems seeing in both of their eyes, have a headache that just won't go away and it just really hurts, or trouble walking, like I said earlier. So those are symptoms for a stroke, and go get checked out.
Exactly.
Don't put it off.
Yeah, but even just go to an urgent care if you're not comfortable calling 911. Don't think it's quite that serious, but just getting yourself checked out. Just recently had a friend go through something similar, not quite to this level, of course. At our age, it didn't make sense for that, but it was something else that was neurological that needed to be taken care of. And so it was a good thing that she called urgent care first. They said, yes, come in. She did it, and it was worth the while to go in and get tested just to be totally safe and not try to just wait it out.
Wow, wow, geez. Okay, so something I did find out in the research I was doing, which just recently I think came out, was that 80% of the heart disease and other chronic diseases can be reduced by following 4 healthy behaviors.
Wow.
And one of them is, of course, eating healthy.
Of course. Yep.
The other one is moving more, or being moving.
That would make sense.
Another one is avoiding tobacco. And the other one is keeping your stress under control.
Awesome. I think those are all really great recommendations. A lot of things we've already talked about. And knowing that it can have such a big impact potentially, I think is so worth it.
Yes, yes.
So specifically when we're talking about eating healthy, how does that really tie into heart disease? Like what specific parts of heart disease are we concerned with here? If you want to dive into that a little more.
Okay. Well, we'll look at blood pressure maybe first, and how eating healthy affects blood pressure. And then also cholesterol seems to be the other big one where we really see that. And stress may influence how you eat some.
Makes sense. And also how your body uses the food.
Right. But that's why the overall eating healthy is important.
Yes, definitely.
Because we need that. So for blood pressure, they estimated that about 50% of the American population now suffer from high blood pressure, and many people don't know it. So it's one of those silent things that you can't feel it exactly, and you can't know that you have high blood pressure. So really going to that doctor and getting that physical every year, or at least getting checkups, is important to know where your blood pressure is and making sure that you don't have high blood pressure.
Sure, and I feel like that's kind of an easy thing to check nowadays, right? Like there are blood pressure cuffs available at most pharmacies that you can go sit and do a readout just to get a better sense for yourself. Obviously, you should always follow up with a physician to know exactly what those numbers mean, but to just be able to take that first initial step and kind of understand a little bit better where you might be at.
And I always get questions about what is normal, and you may not be able to see this on the screen. I thought you might be able to. Maybe you can. The high number, or the top number, is normal is considered 120 over 80, okay? So, or less. So keeping those down is important, we know, and that is what's considered normal now, or less. So keeping that in control is very important.
Definitely.
And there's factors that influence your blood pressure. Some you can't change. Our age, our race, our family history are things we don't have any say over, and we can't make any difference on.
But it's good to be aware, knowing that if you're at a predisposition for one of those things that you can't change, then to take more into account what you can change, right?
And there are quite a few we can change. So being overweight, trying not to stay so you're not too much overweight. Being physically active really does help. Don't have much alcohol. We say 2 drinks for men, 1 for women, and keep it down to even less than that so it's not a daily thing basically, but a few times, maybe a week at the most. Potassium can be helpful, and we'll talk about potassium and what foods are high in potassium in a little bit, to give you some idea of how that can help with your sodium consumption sometimes, or balance it out a little bit. Avoiding tobacco, again, is another one. Keeping our stress under control, so all those play into it again.
Sure.
And then our sodium consumption. They've found that sodium makes our blood pressure go up, so trying to keep that under control is very important. And certain conditions, chronic conditions like diabetes, have a 2 to 4 times higher risk of heart disease or stroke than other problems. So conditions. So it's important to keep those under control.
Definitely.
Now, I have a little quiz for you on salt, okay, or sodium. Okay, we'll see how well you do. How much salt or sodium does the Institute of Medicine at the National Academies of Science recommend people strive to eat daily?
So it shouldn't be any more than 2,400 milligrams for a normal person, correct?
Yes,
who's not on a restricted.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And so what is the approximate average daily sodium intake for persons 2 and up in the United States?
What they usually consume, not what's recommended?
Yes.
Oh gosh, probably closer to 5,000 milligrams-ish.
Someplace in there, from 3,000 to 5,000 a lot of times, so we are way over what we should be.
Sure, absolutely, especially in the convenience foods, fast foods, absolutely.
Which of the following are benefits from reducing the amount of sodium in your diet? Is it lowering your blood pressure, reduced risk of heart disease, reduced risk of stroke, reduced risk of gastric cancer, or all of the above?
All of the above.
You're right. Very good. She's doing great, isn't she? Approximately how much of our sodium comes from processed foods?
Oh, geez, a lot. Probably most of it, 80%-ish.
75% is what they estimate. So you are right, most of it. So that's why avoiding some of those fast foods or sodium-rich foods are really important. And I do have kind of a plate with some of them on right now. Pizza is one of the biggest ones, and of course everybody loves pizza, right? So we all love pizza.
Yes, I think it was National Pizza Day very recently.
Yes, I think you're right. You know, and there's also spaghetti, we've got tacos, we've got enchiladas or burritos. Cheese is another one high in sodium, so is lunch meat, and even though bread is like 10%, one slice of our daily amount of sodium, and so that doesn't seem too bad.
Sure.
But do you usually eat just one slice, or is it 2, or do you eat it 3 or 4 times a year?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to note that salt is a common preservative, right? So that's how it sneaks into our foods too. Yes. So just to keep that in mind when you're reading a label, knowing kind of what you're looking for. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, those can quickly add up without much problem. How much sodium is in a teaspoon of salt?
In a teaspoon of just table salt?
Yes.
Is it like 200 to 400 milligrams?
It's 2,400. So the daily amount you should have is in one teaspoon, of salt. So that's why keeping that low and not adding salt at the table can be a good thing, even though most of our salt, we say, comes from those pre-cooked or other foods, canned and other foods that we get.
Sure, and if you know that it's already in your canned foods, even though it might not taste like it, to then be more aware about the salt you're adding at the table yourself from your salt shaker.
Right, yeah. You know, and no salt added canned foods, if you can find some of those, are the best choice, because it really does make a big difference. And a lot of times you'll see those labeled where it says no salt added, and that makes a big difference. You might even see a heart on there, see, as to how much sodium is in that food, because it really does add up. So it can make a big difference. And one other way you can reduce the sodium in canned foods is to actually rinse them. So you can rinse them, like beans and things that you might buy canned. You can rinse them, and that will reduce the sodium in the can. So if you can find no salt added, that's best. But if not, make sure you start rinsing some of those canned foods, and that'll take some of that.
And if you decide to get something that's low sodium or no salt added, it's almost better to do it that way and then add some salt at the table, because likely the amount you're going to shake on is not going to be nearly the amount that would have been in the processed package initially, because you can always add salt, but you can't take it away, right?
That's right, right. And of course, unless you're one of those people who salts before they even taste the food.
True. Salt to taste, yes, very important.
We do have those people, so you know, removing the salt shaker from the table and not having it on the table can be helpful there, so that.
And I've heard too that sea salt can be even a little bit better. It's a little more flaky, bigger pieces, so you get a little more taste from it. So you might actually wind up using less salt overall if you go for sea salt, which is becoming more common, I think, to find and more affordable as well. So something to maybe consider that route.
Can foods high in salt be high in salt without tasting salty?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. They really can. So just because you don't have that salt taste doesn't mean that they aren't high in salt.
Exactly.
Yes, right. So you can find a lot of frozen fresh vegetables that don't have salt added. So you don't have to worry about it. Just check the back of the label, the ingredients, and if there's salt in it, it will tell you that there is salt. But then those frozen entries or those boxed entries are usually very high in salt, even when it says it's healthy. In fact, this one says that it's 29% of your sodium intake for the day. So
that's crazy, but it makes sense that if you're trying to eat healthier, right, they have to make the food still taste good. So a lot of times it will be higher salt, higher sugar. So that's really important to consider when you could just eat a whole food product that's raw, that you just prepare yourself, that might be really healthier overall.
Yes, right. So some ways to try to reduce that sodium content in our foods, besides just avoiding the salt shaker and trying to buy foods, is best to try choosing fresh or less processed foods.
Yes.
Because we know that most foods that's ultra processed foods or whatever usually are higher in sodium, so trying to avoid that. Purchase some lean meats, of course. Choose low sodium, reduced sodium, or no salt added mixes. Limit those mixes, instant products, sauces, because they always seem to have more sodium in them.
Sure, to keep them shelf stable, you're going to have more of that salt content to preserve, so keeping that in mind. I think you can add a lot of flavor in different ways, which I'm sure you'll talk about.
And also then rinsing, like we said before, is another way. Modifying recipes. Try more herbs and spices.
Definitely.
And other seasonings. There's some salt-free herbs and spices mixes you can buy. So just check and make sure it says no sodium added or no salt added.
I think those are becoming a lot more common too this day and age. So hopefully it will be very easy for you to go to your local grocery store and find a whole variety of seasonings that don't have to include salt, but still taste great.
And there's lots of information on the website or on our on the web about using different flavorings instead of salt, so to season things. So you can try finding quite a bit of those. Change your cooking method so it keeps the flavor in instead of removing flavor. So try baking, grilling, broiling, or stir frying, as that will help. Read labels, and like I said, check that sodium fact. In fact, I happen to bring a big label, one of those new labels, but if you look down at sodium, you can see this product actually has 7%, so it's not doing bad, but it is right there on the label, so you can find out how much sodium is in that product and how much we have. And then you can use a salt substitute possibly if it doesn't interfere with your medication.
That's very important to consider. Always consult a physician, I think, if you're going to do anything that could alter your medications.
Yes. And then try the DASH diet. In fact, it's one of the most recommended diets in the United States. Even U.S. News and World Report, I think, wasn't it? They reported that was one of their top diets besides the Mediterranean diet. So it is an excellent one to try.
Yes, definitely. I've heard a lot of good things about the DASH diet. Whether you really need it or not, it's just kind of a healthy way to eat as well.
And then if you're choosy, you can actually cut your sodium level down quite a bit, okay? Same sandwich, but you can see where we cut the sodium level in half in the sandwich. So buying some bread that has less sodium, buying lunch meat with less sodium, finding some cheese that is lower in sodium, you can cut the levels down of your sodium intake. So that really does help a lot. So just being aware sometimes and looking at different things can make a big difference. Now, eating out can really present some problems for people.
Oh, I'm sure, absolutely.
Because they usually salt things in the restaurant to make it taste better for you.
And quite a bit of salt too, if anybody's ever watched a cooking show. Even just the pasta water. Wow, lots of salt.
And they're always putting it on the meat before they put it in the cook it and everything else. So you can check their website if they have a website. You can ask the waiter or waitress, or ask that they don't put any salt on your food.
Sure, because I feel like that's recently now most restaurants, if not all of them at this point, are required to have nutrition facts available so that you can make an informed choice. So there's always a way to check that out.
And then, ask for no salt added, and then also check about MSG and soy sauce and cured or smoked, because all those do have those things that are added. So try to choose vegetables, fruits, whole grains.
And I do think some
will help a
places will
lot.
have menus that do have like a little heart symbol next to them or something that will
Right.
keep that in mind for you. So that can be another thing to look for to help navigate eating out.
Yes. Now, potassium, we said a little bit earlier, could help you reduce your problems, maybe perhaps for sodium in sodium problems. So, foods high in potassium. Milk is foods high in potassium. Oranges, potatoes, bananas, of course, we always hear about. Avocados. Sweet potatoes, even carrots, tomatoes. So find out what foods are high in potassium and choose those, unless, talk to your doctor about what would be best for you to follow.
Right.
And follow that so that you do have that sodium. Lower it. So
with cholesterol, yeah. Absolutely. So what can we do to help keep our cholesterol lower, diet and otherwise?
Okay. For one thing, exercise is very important with cholesterol also, and keeping that under control. And then there are certain foods that can help lower that LDL level, and because they have soluble fat. So.
And can we stop real quick? Can you just mention the difference between LDL and HDL just for the audience?
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So LDL is low density lipoprotein cholesterol, and that we want to keep lower, okay? Even though it's usually a higher number, or definitely usually is a higher number than our high density lipoprotein, which is HDLs. But we want to try to keep that number lower because that's what builds up that plaque and things in our
or the LDL is typically referred to as the bad cholesterol,
yes,
right?
the bad cholesterol, right. And then our HDL levels we want to increase if possible. Okay, so that's the high density lipoproteins. And best ways to do that is exercise is one of the best ways to do it. And then there are certain ways that help us lower the LDLs. Also, oils will help. So like olive oil, using that, or canola oil, avocados or avocado oil are very helpful in making sure that we kind of help lowering the LDL somewhat, but increasing the HDLs. Also polyunsaturated oils, which is vegetable oils such as soy, corn, sunflower. Those ones are ones that will also be beneficial for our cholesterol.
So thinking about actually consuming healthy fats, the omega-3s, versus the unhealthy or the saturated fats, right? Yeah. So keeping that in mind, that eating healthy fat can actually be good for us in certain ways.
Yes.
But knowing what those are, I think, is the important key part here.
But we do have some foods that are high in what we call soluble fiber, which do help lower the LDLs. And that includes oatmeal, which I don't have pictured here because I don't have oatmeal in there. But eggplant, okra, apples, pears, grapefruits, strawberries, and a lot of the citrus fruits are high in pectin, which does help, has that soluble fiber in it, which will help. Eating nuts, such as almonds and walnuts and peanuts.
Healthy fats again.
Healthy fats again, besides the fatty fish, which we always hear about, which is a high omega-3s. The salmon, the mackerel, the herring, the tuna, the trout. And then flax seeds and walnuts are also good sources. So,
I have heard about flax seeds, having them crushed or broken down, you're more likely to absorb the nutrients from them rather than whole, correct? So that's something important to look for if you're going to go buy flax seeds, to think about buying the crushed rather than the whole.
Yes, that's very true. And it will go rancid pretty quickly, so a good place to keep it is in your freezer so that it doesn't get bad on you so fast.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, so good to do that. And, try to avoid sugar, because that is not real good for us either. So limit those sugar-sweetened beverages. Try to drink water or unsweetened tea or something or coffee is good choices there. And then other recommendations would be to lose weight and, of course, be physically active. We told you that helps a lot, and avoiding tobacco again. So
absolutely.
And healthy foods are the fuel our bodies use to make new cells and create the energy we need to thrive and fight diseases. So it is really important to do that.
I like how a lot of these recommendations are repeated and reinforced, that they can be so so beneficial in so many different aspects of health. So I think it's really cool that this is just tying into all these different parts of how to avoid heart disease.
Right, yes. And then again, we want to avoid the saturated fats because that's what increases the LDLs and things and plays into that. So many of those are the ones we said to stay away from for high blood pressure. Also the cheese and the butter and the shortening and the fats that are high in meat. Pizza again.
Definitely. And that's what can kind of build up and clog your arteries, right? That's the kind of stuff we're talking about here that can lead to those issues.
And it's not that you can't have pizza once in a while,
of course, everything in moderation is what I always like to say.
Don't have it every week or every day.
Sure. Balance is what we like to shoot for, right?
Yes, that's true. Yes. And avoid coconut, palm kernel, and palm oils also. Those are,
natural.
Even though they are considered vegetable oils, they are high in saturated fat, so we want to avoid them. And there's a lot of research behind that, even though I know you hear other things on the TV and the web on that.
Sure, since they're naturally saturated fat but it's still saturated fat, so it's still going to build up similarly.
Right. So it is important. And then a few tips about the S's that we already talked about. S, of course, if you're smoking, quit smoking. Avoid tobacco is the best thing you can do. And for stress relief, there's some tips that all kinds of things you can do to help reduce your stress level. And, it really depends upon what you enjoy or what helps you the most.
Yep,
so exercise is a good one. Eating healthy is always good too. Having positive thoughts, being grateful, writing down in a journal of things you're grateful for that we have found are good. Reading a book you like to read for 10 minutes can be helpful. Meditation, prayer, mindfulness are all really good things to try to help reduce that stress level and help you in that whole situation. Or breathing when you get really stressed out.
Yes, deep breathing. Taking a minute, exactly.
And deep breathe. And then do get help if you just need it. Sometimes you just get overwhelmed and you need some help.
It's okay to ask for help. It's good to ask for help. That's something we always like to encourage on the show, especially when we touch on stress. So I think that is very important.
So here's hoping everybody does a good job of staying healthy and don't reduce their risk of heart disease.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here, Pat, and bringing so many great examples and so much information that we can all learn from and hopefully take at least a couple of these tips into our everyday lives. And I know if you want to go on to our Live Healthy, Live Well blog or Live Smart Ohio, or we have tons of fact sheets on Ohio Line about a lot of this information, that if you have anything specific you want to delve into more, whether it be mindfulness, dietary, what have you, we have resources for all of it. And I always encourage everyone to please reach out to their local extension educators and their offices. Always happy to help and offer programming. So thank you guys for watching today, and we'll catch you next time.